Hello, this is the Mastermind, and I'm with Hendrik Gray slash Dredloc Blerd Entertainment. What do you do in your YouTube channel?
As you mentioned, my name is Kendrick Ray, the Dredloc Blerd, host of Dredloc Blerd Entertainment. I originally started out just doing a mixture of different types of YouTube videos in the beginning. I did the whole reaction video thing. I would do reviews. I do reviews of movies, TV shows, video games, a few things that I've read here and there. I'll do one-off videos such as like rants. I do the same thing we're doing right now. I do interviews and such on my channel. Um, Essentially, within around the time of the pandemic, I started getting into podcasting. So I do have those Dreadlock Blurred Talk podcasts. And pretty much everything I do on YouTube, I do on the podcast as well. It's just in audio format. But with the podcast, as I mentioned before, I do interviews. I do long form videos where I discuss various topics. I have a show called The Weekly Wrap Up, which is where I talk about things in news, entertainment, socially, things like that here and there. And of course, like I said, I do also one-off discussions about, the state of movies, state of like entertainment, things like that, and anything that might be going on in the world.
You have an IMDb, right?
Hmm.
And you write and you direct and you act as well. You have a film called Young Justice Future Shock, right?
Hmm.
So let
Which is, yeah, go ahead.
tell us about what that project is.
Now I should let everybody know that it is not off the ground yet. It is still in the pre-production stages. Young Justice Future Shock is going to be a fan film that I wrote myself back in 2017. The basic premise is I got the idea from the then DCEU when the DCEU was still in play. Um, I took the premise of, pretty much what happened in Batman v Superman, where Superman goes bad in the distant future, but I tied it to the animated series Young Justice, which was one of my favorite series at the time. And I pretty much centered it around Kid Flash, and he was tasked with traveling to the future to try to, you know, but still basically the premise of the tagline is, what if the Flash didn't go back and visit Batman first, like we all thought that happened in Batman v Superman? What if he went back to go visit his, I believe, his great grandson, Kid Flash, Impulse, instead? And Kid Flash assembles a team from the Young Justice team to travel to the future to figure out exactly what happened with Superman. As I mentioned before, that hasn't gone off the ground yet. In the middle of pre-production and stuff, the pandemic happened, so we kind of put that on the back burner. And you know, since then, time has just kind of gotten away from a lot of us on behind the scenes. We've casted a good amount of the roles. We were in the midst of finding a crew to help us film it, but like I said, the pandemic hit, and we all just kind of got sidetracked with other things. But hopefully, later on down the line, that's something we can revisit and try to get back to filming at some point.
What do you find most difficult? Is it directing, writing, acting, or your YouTube channel?
If I had to go by a tier list, I would say directing is definitely the hardest. Writing was relatively easy for me because I enjoyed writing. So that definitely wasn't hardest. Acting could be, I would say, maybe second to directing because, you know, you have your own interpretation of how the character is supposed to be, but the director has a different interpretation of what the character is supposed to be. And if there isn't a constant conversation between the actor and director, things can get lost in translation. So the few acting jobs that I've done haven't been too hard, but it is a thing about memorizing lines, and depending on what type of project. And when you come in on that, you may have a lot of time to read through the script or a little time to read through. And often you'll find that the things get rewritten on the spot, or a lot of them get ad-libbed on the spot, depending on how the flow of dialogue happens within the movie. The YouTube channel was, I mean, was still is easy for me only because it's very easy to set up a camera, sit in the chair, sit at the desk, and just share your thoughts on things. I would say the one setback, and I'm pretty sure you've probably fallen into this a few times here and there, is just making time. Making time to sit, record, edit, and post the videos can be a lot. When I first started YouTube, I was literally recording 3 to 4 videos a day and editing them the same day, and then dropping videos more often are not the same day as well. Depending on what my schedule was like. If I couldn't drop a video that day, I would have to set it up so it could be posted the next day. And aside from just the whole making the video process, um, recording, editing, posting up, and all that stuff, is consistency. You know, at the time when I started my YouTube channel, I wasn't really working at the time, so I completely delved in to the content creator process. So really, I would get up, I would jump on YouTube, search new material, and reaction video I would do. If I was just going to talk about certain things or review, anything, I would carve out time for that. So, like the earlier part of my day will be spent recording, and the latter part of my day will be spent editing and posting up. And at the time when I started, since I have much money, I would rely on free programs and free software to edit my videos, and sometimes they would take hours to edit and complete. Over time, as I've gotten a lot busier and older and started working again, um, my videos have been super inconsistent, but inconsistent. When I jumped into the podcast thing, I'm gonna say right now that the podcast thing is probably the easiest thing to do, which is probably why a lot of people are into the podcasting game right now. Uh, Podcasting was easy. I didn't have to really focus on editing. I could literally just sit, record. If I wanted it to be like a video podcast, I just let the video ride. Editing was just nothing but adding a couple of graphics, and if it was just audio, just submitting the audio. And I put myself on a schedule as far as podcasting is concerned, where I was in the beginning, where I was podcasting every other weekend. So every other weekend, I would, sit down, record a podcast, and post it up. These days, my schedule has gotten a little bit more crazier now that I'm married and I have a kid. So it's literally when I can get the free time. And if I'm not too tired, I'll sit down and record something. And since the beginning of the year, I've said that I was going to try to make myself a lot more consistent with content creation. And now that summer's around the corner for us here in the States, I'm going to be trying to hold myself to that account.
Yeah, I do relate on the whole time consumption on YouTube channels with editing and thinking of new ideas and trying to find some free time. So, what got you into movie reviewing?
I've always been a huge fan of movies. I mean, as a kid, I enjoyed watching movies. I enjoyed going to the movie theaters, things like that. And I've said this before in, ironically, review of this movie. The movie that really turned me into a cinephile was the first Matrix movie. That was the first movie I had seen in the movie theater more than once. Like before that, younger, I go to a movie theater, check out a movie, and then that'd be that. And then I would, telling my age right now, I would wait for the VH to come out or the DVD of that movie come out. But The Matrix, again, which came out in 1999, that was the first movie that ever got me to come out to a movie theater the following weekend, and then the following weekend after. That's the movie I absolutely fell with, and I've become a complete cinephile since then. My business to do as many movies as I can. Um, the review thing, interestingly enough, didn't come until a little bit later. When I started my YouTube career. I'll be the first to admit I did the reaction video thing because honestly speaking, it was the easiest thing to do. And anyone who tells you otherwise is probably lying to themselves. Doing a reaction video is what a lot of people in the big YouTube boom were doing. It wasn't until maybe a few months or like maybe almost a year after that where I figured it would probably be best. It would probably make sense for me to start reviewing the things I watch because most good reactors do the same exact thing at the same time. They are reacting to you know a trailer. That's probably the most common thing we see reactors react to. Content creators react to is trailers for movies or TV shows or video games. Sit there, they'll watch, they'll make comments. They're either really impressed with what they're seeing or they're not really impressed with what they're seeing. And usually a good reactor will review what they've just watched towards the end of their video. Um, and what I did after, getting into the reactor game, I figured like, there's things that I watch that, I can only react to with myself. I can't react with it on screen like people are doing right now that are reacting to movies and stuff and TV shows and so and stuff like that. So the next best thing would be to review a lot of those movies. A couple of the guys I started to follow, early career, people like Crickman or Jeremy Johns, even Tyrone Magnus. You guys are familiar with him. He was one of the guys that I started following early on in my youth career, and I kind of looked at how we're doing and seeing the review on news as well, and I figured, what, that's kind of right up my alley. You know, a reaction, that kind of takes time and a lot of editing. Your review, that's really cool. And I think, interestingly enough, though, the first review I ever did on my channel before I started doing reaction videos was to Mortal Kombat X. That might have been the first review I've ever done. Thinking back on my channel now, and then it just went from there because, like I said before, love of movies spans a lot of other things that I'm a big fan of. So any chance I get, I can talk movies. I'm going to, and it will next best for me to do would be to sit in front of a camera and talk about my thoughts on a movie.
So you talked about your inspirations or YouTubers that got you into movie reviewing. Chris Stuckman.
Yeah,
So
Chris Stuckman
he's
was actually. Mhm.
so he's used to be very harsh reviewing movies, but then after becoming a filmmaker, he basically changed his tactics or his criticisms on reviewing movies. Instead, he just only praises them and doesn't rant on bad movies. Is that a problem in the reviewing space, or is that a valid thing?
I'm aware of the Chris Stuckman situation. I've been kind of following it for the past couple of months or so. I know the movie in question was Madam Web, which I've watched myself. I've watched it recently. I didn't go to the movie theaters to go watch it. I watched it because it dropped on Netflix about a couple of weeks ago. I, I've been doing I literally been doing the YouTube thing almost 10 years. I started really doing it in 2015. So I've seen a lot of shifts and changes within the YouTube community, and I'll be completely honest. I've seen a lot of it turn kind of negative as far as review is concerned. Um, I look at such channels like it's the quartering, and even probably one of the most prominent reviewers that people talk about or people like to consider one of the better reviewers out there is the Critical Drinker. Chris Stuckman as a filmmaker, you know, I see where he's coming from. I understand his motivation for not wanting to pretty much tear down a movie, but as at the same on the flip side, as a filmmaker, these are these are critiques that you have to talk about because these are the things that you kind of want to avoid. You want to avoid the mistakes that were made that didn't make Madam Web such a great movie, and you want to incorporate those critiques into what you create. Um,
Okay,
I
oh, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say, like I said, I completely understand where he's coming from. Considering the fact that he literally has a section on his YouTube channel called Hilariosity, where he just kind of, I mean, in jest, jokingly rips on movies, rips on movies that are considered bad, and again, at the end of the day, it's all entertainment, whether it's a good movie or it's a bad movie. You know, I look at another person like Jeremy Johns, who to this day has not really changed his format of you know video videography. He still reviews his movies the same way he's done. If it's a great movie, he considers it awesome spectacular. If it's a semi-decent movie, he considers it either a movie that needs to be drunk to watch. If it's a not so great movie, it's a movie he considers you would probably enjoy if you were drunk. And of course, there's the worst of the worst, I mean, excuse my language, which he considered a dog shit movie. Like I said, as long as I've been following Jeremy Johns, he hasn't changed his formula at all. And it's from what I understand, I don't believe he has any aspirations of being a filmmaker. He's just a guy that just likes to review things. And you can separate the two. You can be a filmmaker, but you can also be a film critic as well. You know, when I eventually get things out there, even if they are fan films, fan related things, I would want someone to honestly critique my stuff honestly. If you don't like it, tell me what you didn't like about it. If you do like it, tell me what you did like. That's why I say at the end of all of my videos, post your comments in the comment section below. Let me know what you think about what I talked about in this video. If you like it, hit the thumbs up. If you don't, hit the thumbs down. I just want people to be their authentic selves. I do feel like a lot of black backlash he's receiving is not necessarily warranted, and I know it's coming from a lot of people that essentially make their content based on just bashing a lot of things. And to me, that's not being a balanced content creator. There has to be a balance. You gotta, you know, there's there can't be more things that outweigh the good that are bad. I mean, is the state of movies these days not that great? Sure. You know, for every for every end game, Avengers Endgame, there is a Madam Web. You know, like even me to a certain degree, like there isn't a movie where I felt was complete trash. But at the same time, if I have an inkling that a movie that's getting ready to come out may not be a movie that I'm not going to like, I'm not going to go watch it. I'm going to save my money. Keep it in my pocket. If there is a movie that I see that I feel like I might enjoy, that's when I'll go see it. A movie like Not a Web that I knew I wasn't going to go see in the movie theater, it dropped on Netflix, and I figured, okay, why not? I'll check this out. Just a quick review right now. Madam Web would have been a movie. Madam Web is a movie that probably would have did better numbers if it came out in the early 2000s. It was bound to tank, you know, in this day and age, in this time frame that we're in right now. If it came out back in 2003, like before Spider-Man 2, like Tobey Maguire Spider-Man 2, it probably would have done okay. The same
I
thing with Morbius.
kind of disagree a bit because there was kind of like cheesy movies back then in 2000s that didn't do well. Daredevil, Elektra, Catwoman.
And you know what, you're absolutely right because Daredevil was semi decent. Elektra was horrible. Me and a friend went to go see Electra. We wanted our money back at the end. But I think the difference between then and now is everybody has a voice. And, you know, everyone's entitled to their opinion. But I mean, what I'm about to say might be a little bit controversial, but I think everyone doesn't really need to voice their opinion. If you can voice your opinion in a way where it's not just tearing down something, like I look at, a good example would be The Last Jedi. That's the best example I can think of. And a lot of people hated The Last Jedi, like hated it. I didn't. I didn't hate The Last Jedi. I understood. I kind of understood where the director was trying to go with it. A lot of people hated it. Like another example, Ghostbusters 2016, the all-female Ghostbusters. I didn't hate that either. Would I go out and buy it? Probably not. And I'm a person that loves Ghostbusters. I have all the movies currently. I have one, two. I have Afterlife. Um, I haven't watched Frozen Empire yet, but I plan to do that real soon. Um, I look at when it comes to a review, I try to weigh the positives and negatives of what I'm watching. You know, if the positives slightly outweigh the negatives, then I can give it like I could give it I could call it a decent movie. Again, I try to be as honest as I can when I review movies. And like I'll usually let you know like if I enjoyed the movie, but if it's a movie that I feel like I never need to watch again, that's where I'm at. If I feel like I never need to watch a certain movie, I will let you know. But if it's a movie that I know I can go back to watching over and over and over again, I will tell you that too.
What are your top five movies of all time?
My top five movies of all time. It's funny because I think I answered. I think I was asked this question a while ago. The Matrix is definitely one of them. I think The Matrix created it literally created a new standard as well, not only as far as filmmaking but storytelling. Like the year that movie dropped, everybody was talking about it. And to this day, people still talk about, The Matrix being one of the most pivotal movies to come out in, you know, in this century, really. Um, as I mentioned before, Ghostbusters, that's another one of my favorite movies. A movie that wasn't supposed to work. Like literally, and many people have said that Ghostbusters was a movie that wasn't supposed to work, and it ended up becoming a literal cultural phenomenon. You know, you see the logo, you automatically know what it is, and it doesn't matter how old or how young you are. You see that no ghost logo, you automatically know that it stands for Ghostbusters. It's one of the top recognized icons throughout the world. Um, so like I said, The Matrix, Ghostbusters. Wow, it's been a while. I kind of want to say the Lord of the Rings trilogy, just for the scale of what it took to make those series of films alone. And I'm talking the original trilogy, not the Hobbit trilogy. The original Lord of the Rings is a masterpiece in filmmaking. You know, so much so that even the extended edition leaves people still wanting more. I think that's a better little pieces that was translated into film seen in a long time. I've seen every single Lord movie in the theaters. Sat through all 3 hours of it, and it did not. I didn't even get bored. I didn't fall asleep. I enjoyed every single minute watching those movies. Um, I,
Uh,
I
y-
I have to
oh,
throw a martial arts movie in there. I definitely have to throw a martial art. Like Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon is also one of my top favorite movies as well. Um,
that's funny
it
because
was
I
just
was watching Bruce Lee movie yesterday, A Big Boss.
Big Boss. That's a favorite of mine. But the Enter the Dragon is just one of those movies. Like it's his first like real. joint movie with Hong Kong and Hollywood, and it really gave us a lot of things. Like it became the inspiration for stuff. It became the inspiration for Mortal Kombat. You know, actually, and that reminds me of the 1995 Mortal Kombat, one of my favorite movies as well. Um, you got to figure up until that point, video game movies weren't didn't do that well. The original Super Mario Brothers movie, you know, kind of stunk. The Street Fighter movie, with the exception of the late Raul Julia, was was kind of bad. I mean, right now we can watch Street Fighter and look at it as a cheesy fun because of how over the top a lot of those characters were in that movie. But I have to say, the first Mortal Kombat movie was probably one of the best. Is probably one of the best video game movies done right. From the casting to the atmosphere to the filming. Um, I mean, we're at this point right now. We're all in a. It doesn't matter how old or young you are. We can't really see anybody else being Shang Tsung except Terry Hiroyuki Tagawa. He literally brought Shang Tsung to life in that movie, and it'll still be. And granted, we've had some pretty decent video game movie adaptations in the past couple of years or so. But that original Mortal Kombat movie was it still gets people hyped up. Once the music starts, it still gets people hyped up. And I guess my fifth favorite movie of all time. Hmm, that's interesting. I mean, honestly, I'll just come out and say it's. I would say the entire Dark Knight trilogy, but it's really the Dark Knight itself. Um, what was done with the Dark Knight trilogy that Christopher Nolan put together was fantastic. I still think Batman Begins is still a very slept on Batman movie. It's probably one of the better origin stories for Batman on cinema. But what was done with the Dark Knight was the late Heath Ledger's Joker. Hit like again, the proof is in the pudding. His portrayal of the Joker is still one that is withstood the test of time. You know, Once the merchandise and the costumes and stuff came out, people still mimic that version of the Joker to this day. That's how iconic Heath Ledger's Joker was, and just the overall casting. Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent, Two Face, was fantastic. I know people still have their gripes with Christian Bale as Batman, but for a time, he was considered one of the best portrayals of Batman. I mean, Michael Keaton's still the better one, but you know, but yeah, those no, I would say those are my top five favorite movies of all time: The Matrix, Ghostbusters, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the original Mortal Kombat movie, and The Dark Knight.
Are you into art films?
I try to change up, what I view um on screen. And the rise of all these streaming platforms has definitely, to me, helped out a great deal. So I try to at least check out a couple of indie films and even foreign films, as a matter of fact, that I can watch and take a look at. You know, I feel like I've always believed that a lot of things that don't land in the movie theaters, the so-called straight to TV movies, oftentimes they can be better than some of the mainstream movies that come out in theaters. You just got to really dig deep and check them out. Like for instance, like one of my favorite action series is the Undisputed series, with Scott Adkins. Um, I think that's one of the better martial arts movies, to come out that didn't hit the mainstream movie theaters. Even certain horror movies that I've checked out. I'm trying to think of a couple right now because I've seen a great deal that have been like really really good. Um, that I would say this is the downside to being a cinephile because you watch so much stuff, and sometimes it's just hard to recap what you watched. And because me myself, since I don't always jump in front of the camera after I finish watching something to review it, sometimes it'll often slip through the cracks of my mind. and I won't remember it, but I'll remember certain bits and pieces of what I remember watching. I remember I taught it was a Spanish horror movie called Veronica that premiered years ago on Netflix. I remember a lot of people saying this is probably one of the scariest movies they've ever seen. It wasn't scary to me, but then again, scary movies don't really scare me. You know, I tune into certain scary movies just to see if the story holds up and if it's plausible. Um, like for instance, I know A24 is really big these days. Hereditary is a movie I have not gone back to watch. Me and my wife saw it in the movie theaters. Scary, like I said, scary movies don't scare me, but there was something about Hereditary that made me feel uneasy. And as I mentioned before, is a movie that I haven't really gone back to go watch. Um,
Is it because it was very unsettling, or is it something that's you just satisfied with the first viewing and you just didn't
I
want
was definitely,
to watch it again?
I was definitely satisfied with the first viewing. Like again, like I mentioned before, horror movies don't genuinely scare me. They either make me laugh or they just make me at it. But just the uneasiness of Hereditary was just, it was very pronounced. Considering the fact that I had no idea what the movie was going to be about going into it. You know, I'm here just thinking it's a family dealing with mental health issues, but on like a bigger scale. Not to spoilers for people who haven't watched Hereditary, but to find out that they're dealing with possession and satanic rituals and things like that. That kind of took me back, but I hung in there just for the way the story was progressing. Now, granted, it kind of lost me towards the end of it, but it was only a small little nitpick about the movie itself. I think the movie as a whole did a great job. I think Tony Collette was great. Alex Wolff was great. Um, the whole movie itself, I thought was a pretty substantial horror movie. And thinking about it now, there's been a couple of horror movies that I thought, you know, really stood out as being kind of original. Smile was a movie that I thoroughly enjoyed and I've watched a couple of times. So, like I mentioned before, a movie like Smile, a simple premise, a real simple premise. It does a lot psychologically to you. It's one of those movies where you don't need a big jump scare to achieve your horrific effect. Just the subtle mind game that it plays with you is good enough for me. And it's been something I've been waiting to see happen. I've been waiting to see horror movies kind of get away from the standard hack and slash stuff like that. Play with the mind a little bit. Give us something to kind of grit our teeth about. Like, I mean, shoot. I mean, I know this is considered a joke at this point, but the movie Megan, or like some people like to call it Mithrigan, you know, I enjoyed that too. I mean, I know people were calling it like a Chucky 2.0, something like that, but like I thought Megan, I mean, even just the premise itself about a AI powered android that's supposed to pretty much imprint onto a child and become literally like their best friend and guardian, you know. And with everything that's being discussed with AI right now about how it's rapidly advancing and stuff, it's like I could see that happening. I could see an android deciding that, like, you're probably not in the best interest of a child and things like that. That's another horror movie that I enjoyed a great deal. I enjoy horror movies that kind of, you know, take a concept, take a concept that people would probably laugh at and just turn it on its head. And there's been a good amount of foreign films, or even just lower budget films that I checked out that have done fairly well. In fact, I try to make it my business to watch those, even some of those short films on YouTube that are like horror based. I can't remember the name of this one for the life of me, but there's one that I watched where it was essentially a box was given to a guy, and the directions were to never open a box or something like that. But if you do, you got to keep your eyes on the box. And as time progressed, uh, wet guy would start to peek out of the box. To me, to me, that's good storytelling. It's not long. It's you know, and it keeps you on your toes because it's just like it's almost like one of those jump scare type of stories that you often hear about. And I enjoy things like that. I'm going to be completely honest with you. A lot of the fan made stuff I've seen on YouTube oftentimes trumps what's being put out in movie theaters.
Speaking of AI, do you think AI is gonna take over Hollywood or basically movies and remove writers or and animators, or do you think they'll be okay?
I think. See, this is a tough one because on the one hand, it's advanced such a great deal since its inception, since the birth of ChatGPT and things like that. You know, it's changed a lot. I still remember the pictures that people used to post up of AI art where individuals had like 10 fingers on one hand, or they had like 3 rows of teeth, or things were just like super exaggerated. But now it's gotten to the point where it's like it's almost, and I mean literally, it's literally almost seamless with how realistic a lot of these pictures look. Um, I know it's been implemented. I know as far as writing is concerned, AI has been implemented at a lot of different venues. I mean, I just recently finished up a course at school where the professor said it was okay to use AI to an extent. You know, we're at a point right now where you can use AI to spruce up your resume, to help you write a short story, to generate ideas for you. I think as far as advancement is concerned, I think it'll be a good while before humans are phased out of the writing and animation process. I still feel like there needs to be a human touch when it comes to writing and animation and things like that, because only the human mind and the human heart can craft certain stories that literally tug at. AI hasn't reached that point yet, and I know a lot of companies are trying to put a cap on that so it doesn't get to that point. But I do know there's some industries that are fully invested in AI just taking over because it's going to be less cost effective for them. They don't have to pay physical writers, cool. They don't have to pay physical animators, cool. Things like that. I know certain production companies are hoping to get to that point, but I think at the end of the day, there still has to be a human element to the creative process, and there's nothing that can change that. Honestly speaking, there's nothing that can change that.
Hollywood has had a bit of a decline. What do you think is the biggest problem with Hollywood right now?
I would say the biggest problem Hollywood has right now is one, just not wanting to pay people. That's first and foremost. That's one.
What was that you said again?
I think the first problem, first and foremost, is them refusing to just pay people. I
Oh,
think
okay.
that's where the strikes came from, the writer strike and the actor strike. They came from production companies, producers not wanting to pay people what they're owed and what they deserve for a project. That's always going to be a battle. No matter where you are across the planet, you want to pay what you're worth for your work. Um, I would say the other issue, and I've talked about this before on my podcast, it's just lack of originality. You know, Many people have talked about this before. Max Landis has spoke about this on his YouTube channel. People on TikTok have talked about this a great deal. And like I said, I've talked about this also. We've reached a point in entertainment where original stuff still comes out. I don't want people to get it twisted. Original stuff still comes out, but production companies are looking for what can be turned into a franchise. Now, a lot of people can say that the MCU is a big part of that, and it's a big entity to blame for that. But franchises have been a thing forever. The only difference is that people are trying to capitalize off it right now. I mean, Max Landis said it himself the best. He said, writers these days, they're not writing one shots. They're writing things that can be turned into a franchise that can stretch for a long period of time. And not to knock them too much, financially financially speaking, it makes sense. You know, do you really want to spend years having to churn out original story, or do you want to attach yourself to a franchise where you only need to churn out a story for this character or turn out a story for that character, so they have their own solo movie, and then later on at some point they all converge for the big collaboration movie, aka like the Avengers and things like that. you know like I said, financially speaking, it makes sense. It makes sense to attach yourself to a franchise or create something that can be turned into a franchise. Like I said, Max Landis, he even said that a lot of these guys, a lot of these so-called writers, you know, not even such as writers, but producers, even started turning to original stories that they themselves can turn into a franchise. That's been the biggest thing. So I think it may break. It may break at some point because every time you turn around, something's taking too long to be written, and it's constantly rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. Like, I mean, Blade can't seem to get his footing off the ground for some reason. You know, they casted Mahershala Ali as Blade like what, 5 years ago, maybe, if I'm not mistaken, and they have still yet to make any type of headway whatsoever as far as filming is concerned. I don't think they even have a solid script. I mean, the person who I think was attached to write the film dropped out. It was the same thing with, I think, The Flash or something like that. It happens more often than not. Because there's also the aspect of creative differences. Producers want the movie to go one way, but the writers have a different vision in their head. So it creates that conflict with themselves. And now, unless you're someone like Tyler Perry, who literally writes and produces and directs his own films, that's a different story. Disney owns the rights to Marvel. So they are responsible for all the things that happen within the MCU. Yes, they have different directors and different writers and things like that, but it's still under the House of Mouse. So there's just so many different aspects that you have to look at in regards to the filmmaking process. And like we talked about with the rise of AI and production companies looking at the idea of phasing out certain roles within the filmmaking process, is going to be very tricky to see. Very tricky.
Another one of the reasons, in my opinion, is that they don't really give fans what they want. Like some fans, like fans basically be like, or the audience be like, I want this, and then Hollywood just goes, no, you shouldn't ask for this. We'll give you this. Or audience says, no, we don't want this. Is not good, and then Hollywood lashes out and says, gaslights them into saying you're toxic, you're racist, or you're sexist, or you're bigots.
Now, and I've talked about this before also, are there toxic fans out there? Absolutely. There are toxic fans in every aspect in fandom, whether it's comic books, video games, sports, movies, TV, whatever. There are definitely toxic fans out there. On the flip side, though, a lot of the people running these production companies have a very antiquated sense of thinking. So there's also that to consider. There's a very antiquated sense of thinking. Now, to all the sexist, misogynistic, racist fans out there, a lot of these things are not meant for you. But at the same time, like anybody else, we don't like to be pandered to. You know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Um, a good example would probably have to be something like the Little Mermaid, the live action Little Mermaid. Now, did we need a live action Little Mermaid? Probably not. We probably did not need one. But the idea of people losing their minds over the fact that Halle Bailey was cast as Ariel and she's black. It's like you're hung over the fact that she's black instead of being hung over the fact that she's a mermaid that can sing. You know, it's it's literally it's one of those pick your battle type of situations. That's what I look at these days, and that's how I think a lot of people need to start thinking about these things. It's a pick your battle situation. I mean, let's look at the latest controversy with Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed Shadows is the next game to come out later on this year from Ubisoft, and they have pretty much two main characters of color. One is a Japanese shinobi ninja named Naoe, and the other is the black samurai Yasuke. Yasuke, who is an actual realistic character. He's a real person that existed in the real world. Now, granted, there have been other you know non-fictional characters that have appeared within the Assassin's Creed franchise, but the amount of people losing their mind over the historical accuracy about a game where the main premise, and I've talked about this on TikTok before, the main premise of Assassin's Creed deals with a character, Desmond, who through some science mumbo jumbo gets to relive the past lives of his ancestors who are part of a fraternity of assassins. And their task is to shape the course of human history. There
Is it
was a
alright if I put some of my input? So
yeah.
I do get like people are overreactive, but there is a bit of I say it like this, it's like if you do the reverse, like for example, if you get Blade and make him into a white man, wouldn't that
Mhm.
spot then would you would you be fine with it or would you be like, no, this is bad?
Now, here's the thing with that. In certain cases, the race should not matter. However, when the character itself is the character that they are because of the race they are or the gender that they are, that's a different story. You know, if Blade was originally written to be a white guy, you know, that'd have been one thing. I mean, like let's look at a good example would be let's see, like so basically an established fictional character. You know, there's many varying degrees to that. Again, people talk about Black Panther. People mention like what if Black Panther was a white person? It's like, well, you got to understand the historical factors behind that character of the Black Panther. The Black Panther is a fictional king of a fictional nation of Wakanda in Africa. You know, that plays well into that. Like something like again, like I mentioned before, Halle Bailey being Ariel, you could have casted any other. That's a character whose accuracy is not embedded in their color. Now, like the color thing, as far as like Ariel is concerned with the Little Mermaid, not a big deal to me. Now, if you gender swapped it, that probably might be a cause for concern, considering what the you know regular story of the Little Mermaid is about. But at the same time, we also got to look over the fact that the Little Mermaid movies that we got, aren't accurate to the actual Little Mermaid story. In the original Little Mermaid story, the prince marries somebody else and she dies. So there's those things to consider. I mean, in regards to source material, you got to be very careful how you handle source material. I mean, again, looking at someone like Blade, you know, Blade, I mean, for all intents and purposes, could have been anyone. It could have been the character of any race. You know, the character of Blade just happened to be black because of the time frame of which the character was created. You know, not that many people around that time would have seen a black half human, half vampire before. At least by the time when Blade came out, and not only is he a half human, half vampire, but he's killing vampires. That's a pretty interesting dynamic. Um, I mean, thinking
That's
about even.
that.
Mhm.
Oh, so that's the thing. Like, it's kind of a one-way thing. It, it doesn't make sense to be outraged over a race swap if it's like a white person to black person, but a black person to a white person is considered racist or is something that's erasing black culture.
In so much as the fact that you know when when characters of color are created, you know there is something intrinsically there that ties to the culture. You know, like for instance, let's look at. I mean, hell, let's look at something like Dragon Ball Z. You know, let's look at the character of Piccolo. If you grew up, I mean, I'm 40 years old, so I've watched Dragon Ball Z since it came out. You know, many black people attach, themselves to Piccolo as they look at him as a person of color. Now, granted, he's green, and there's no real indication of him being anywhere kind of connected to, you know, black or even African culture. If anything, he's probably connected more to, I would probably say, Middle Eastern culture. The Nameks in Dragon Ball Z, they kind of lend themselves to be a little bit more Eastern, little more Middle Eastern as opposed to like African or just black. But a lot of us attach ourselves to the character of Piccolo because we kind of feel like not only is he black coded, but we kind of look at him as like an individual of color. So it's varying degrees for the most part. It's just varying degrees. Like again, let's look at Spider-Man for instance. Let's look at the character of Miles Morales, who is his own separate character. He's his own separate character aside from Peter Parker. We got Peter Parker, and then we have Miles Morales, but they're both Spider-Man. You know, I remember the controversy surrounding him when Miles Morales was first created. It's like people get this idea that those characters are like the original characters are being erased. It's like no, Peter Parker is still there. We just got the bonus of having another Spider-Man, and now we have an entire Spider-Verse. Where different people of all different walks of life can literally be Spider-Man. Um, I mean, there's so many examples that we can look at. Um, all I'll say is certain characters who are written to connect with a certain demographic on the planet were written that way. You know, Blade, you know, for the most part, represents Black culture. You know, Black Panther, for the most part, represents African culture. Luke Cage represents African culture. You know, any character, you know, at this point can kind of be representative of any culture. I mean, how many Black Supermen have we had? We had John Henry Irons, Steel. He's only connected to us in so much to the fact that he is Black.
He just happens to be, a offshoot of a Superman type figure. We got Calvin Ellis, who is a Superman from a different universe, but he's a black Superman, but he's also the president of the United States. I know that character was created to kind of be a representation of former President Barack Obama. In fact, we have another black Superman, Val Superman, who comes from Earth 2. You know, he just so happens to be a character. Just so happens to be a Superman figure that happens to be black. But it and it's like what I said before. It all depends on how the character is written. And I think that's the biggest issue. I think a lot of people are failing to recognize because, like I said before, if the story makes sense, I don't mind race swapping or gender bending if the story makes sense. If it doesn't, and if you're just doing it just to pander, it's not going to work. That's the way I look at it. If you're just pandering just to pander, it's not going to work. But if the story absolutely if the narrative makes sense, then I can kind of roll with it.
So about the Assassin's Creed Backlash. So I have no problem having a black samurai because in there's been like black samurais like Afro Samurai. There's been black
Mm-hmm.
samurais in different um movies and TV shows and all that. And Assassin's Creed has never been historical accurate. For
Exactly.
example,
Yep.
for example, the Medici family wasn't this good family. They were actually like brutal, and Cesare wasn't this dictator as well. And yeah, the only thing that's the problem is that they kind of using it as like to cause controversy, and people are not talking about the pricing with the whole subscription that they're pulling, the microtransactions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, unfortunately, we also live in a time where controversy sells. You know, it's been that way for the past, probably, I would say the past 10 years has been that way, where controversy sells. Anything that can get the people talking about the game. I myself have never been a fan of microtransactions. That's probably why I don't really play games like Fortnite or Apex or things like that. And I know those aren't really microtransaction but still, it's just one of those things where it's like I could never really get into. But again, like you mentioned, a lot of people aren't talking about the real issue. How much is this game going to cost? How much is this going to run you? You know, I would be more concerned with how much money I'm going to be dishing out for this game as opposed to what the content of the game is about. I mean, if I'm going to be pushing out all this money, I would hope that the game is going to be very good.
It's also about the intentions, the
Hmm.
Ubisoft's intentions that is the problem. Are they doing it to kind of like pander or just to like do like a sell their game in like a desperate type thing, being like, oh, we got this, please buy our game.
Hmm.
Do you think that's
Yeah.
happening or
Much like the movie industry, a lot is kind of going on within the gaming industry. Um, it's funny. I look at Capcom because Capcom has been spending a lot of time remaking a lot of its Resident Evil games, which I kind of understand. We got new consoles, new technology, so you kind of want to make the game look and move a little bit better. But you know, much like the movie industry, there is kind of a lack of originality. And if there is original games, because I'm a PlayStation player, that's all I've ever played. I try to jump on the PlayStation store and see what other original indie games I can find that I might enjoy. Sometimes a few are ever seen, but then again, my preferences as video games is kind of different from a lot of other people's. So um, it's definitely a lot to consider when it comes to the video game industry. Um, and microtransactions is definitely a factor that hasn't been helping them in the past couple of years or so. And I I I feel like the gaming industry is doing slightly better than the entertainment industry because they have a little bit more freedom to kind of craft what they want. But at the same time, there is always a possibility of them falling into a pitfall. Um, that's the way I see it.
So you mentioned Star Wars Last Jedi. So
Hmm
what do you think was the backlash?
I, I, I definitely feel like the backlash that the Last Jedi received was for the simple fact that Luke Skywalker was in front and center. So it was kind of a nostalgia backlash that fans were giving because Luke Skywalker wasn't at the forefront. I think people were expecting Luke Skywalker to just jump right into action. Considering how what's that? The Force Awakens ended with Rey finding Luke on what is that, Jakku, and trying to hand him his lightsaber, only for us to jump right into the Last Jedi. He takes the lightsaber and just throws it over his shoulder. And people are just like, "That's not my Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker wouldn't do that." And my thing is like, well, let's hear him out. Let's hear what he has to say. Like, I didn't hate the Last Jedi. I didn't hate it. I saw who was it, Ryan Johnson. I saw what Ryan Johnson was trying to do, what kind of story he was trying to tell. A lot of people don't see it that way, but again, that's because a lot of people are viewing these things with rose-colored glasses. They have a major nostalgia boner for a lot of these old properties, Star Wars, um, Indiana Jones, the MCU itself. A lot of people have nostalgia boners for these things, and they want these things to go a certain type of way. Um, Me, I'm the type of person that if the story is interesting, I can probably get into it. The sequel trilogy of Star Wars, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker, um, were decent. They don't beat the original. And many of us have said that already. They don't beat the original. But as a writer, I'm open to exploring different alternatives or different takes to a story. I feel like that's where you can kind of stretch your creative liberties a little bit because if we just spend if we just spend all this time rehashing the same story over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, people are going to get tired of it. You know, that's probably why I gravitate to like all these fan films that are on YouTube and other streaming services and things like that, because at least they're trying to take a different turn with it. It's not just the same old same story just being retold and retold. I mean, like hell, even comic books themselves, they try to at least change it up every time like they reboot themselves, every couple of years or so. Sometimes it doesn't work, so they just reboot it again. But they keep trying. But as long as you try to take it in an original, direction, you can't really go wrong. People are going to have their opinions about these things no matter what. I mean, you can be, and like we talked about before, these production companies that look at people who try for originality, and production companies are just like, no, this is what you're going to get because it's worked before and it's going to keep working. And at some point, the system's going to crack, and you're going to have to reevaluate how you're doing things. Let's look. I mean, look at the MCU right now. They went from dropping what 2 or 3 movies a year, and now Deadpool and Wolverine is the only MCU movie we're getting this year. The only one. Sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate how these things are done or what got you there in the first place. Because, I mean, when the MCU started, they would drop like maybe 2 movies a year, if that. And then ultimately it would build up, you know, I mean, the first phase of the MCU went from 2008 to 2012. That's about 4 years. But the fans can't become satiated, so they demand more, and then the companies want to put out more to meet that demand. And sometimes it's at the cost of their actors, their writers, their producers, everyone else part of the crew. In fact, oftentimes the real casualty is the story itself because she gets torn to bits, and then it becomes something that you can't even recognize it. So I look at these instances, and at some point, the Hollywood machine is going to have to wake up and reevaluate itself. I mean, the DCEU went out kind of on a whimper. The last DCEU movie was Aquaman 2. Wasn't horrible, but again, how can you enjoy something when this is the end of this version of the franchise and it's going to be rebooted within a couple of years or so? So that
Uh,
all that and mhm.
oh, continue.
I was going to say, and that's probably where a lot of the gripes from fans comes from as well, because it's like you start off one way and then you kind of finish another way, and then you try to recapture that same lightning in a bottle, and it doesn't happen that way. There's only very few and far between chances where you can recapture lightning in a bottle. It is what it is. Like Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters, I consider lightning in a bottle. Is a movie that should not have worked, but it did. Hell, the first Iron Man movie, I think a lot of us were expecting it to not be anything. Considering who was the lead in Robert Downey Jr., who had been going through his issues up until that point, but lo and behold, Iron Man became one of the best movies within the franchise. And by the end of Endgame, people were singing the praises of Robert Downey Jr. I mean, there's a reason why his name is the last in the credits in Avengers Endgame, is because he's the one that started it all. And if it wasn't for his portrayal of Tony Stark, who knows what would have happened with the MCU? It probably would have been dead in his tracks right from there.
Personally, I think issue is not like the character shift of Luke, but I think backlash was the character assassination because we have been seeing a history of characters being character assassinated to make room for new characters like Indiana Jones, Joel for Abby, just different types of characters that basically get sidelined for a new character when it should be either he passes the torch and leaves, or you balance the new character and the legacy character.
I think, and I completely understand what you're saying, is because it's I feel like these companies, they're in a rush to again, like I said, they're in a rush to try to recapture lightning in the bottle. So a lot of these guys think the best way to do that is to introduce something new, introduce someone new, and to get rid of the previous character. I mean, again, just going back to the MCU, they introduced us to Kate Bishop, they introduced us to Kamala Khan, um, Yelena Belova, um, uh, Juan Maximov's children, uh, Tom Holland's Spider-Man, characters like those, to try to usher in a younger generation into the MCU. But a lot of the characters that were there that established us have been gone to the wayside, with the exception of Thor. I mean, now it's interesting that he's the only MCU character that's literally getting a fifth movie. No of the other characters have even gotten the fifth movie. Not Tony, not I mean, not
Not anything else. I,
yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay. Like I was saying, at the end of Endgame, Cap passed on his shield to Sam. It made sense. There's a passing of that torch. Iron Man didn't really pass his torch on to anyone because, you know, he was gone. But there's definitely a way for those things to be done and to be done properly. You know, shoehorning. I mean, and not to say that they're just shoehorning people in things like that, and not to say that, but there has to be a build up or at least a setup for things like that. You know, but it's I don't know. It's very interesting to think about, and it's interesting to see. Um, so I think now with everything being like slowed down at this point, they're probably gonna try to reevaluate themselves and get themselves back together.
What are your top five favorite video games?
Sonic the Hedgehog. I've always been a Sonic fan ever since I was a kid, so that's that's without question. The rest of them are kind of just fighting. Well, no, Ghost of Tsushima is one of my favorite games, also, so I enjoy playing that a great deal. Um, Tekken. I've been a fan of Tekken since Tekken 2, so I played that a lot. Mortal Kombat is another one that I've enjoyed playing a great deal. And if I had to pick a fifth one, hmm, um, probably Street Fighter. Street Fighter, I'm also a big fan of playing as well. Street Fighter.
Street Fighter, okay.
hmm
Um, what do you think makes a good character, and what do you think makes a bad character?
Um, a character with a very good backstory is what sells it. Um, Ryu from Street Fighter, is interesting in the fact that his story is pretty simple. He's just trying to better himself, become a better fighter. So that's why he travels the world fighting people. You look at someone like, I mean, Sonic. Sonic is an energetic, fast talking, fast moving hedgehog, just like everyone and have fun. So, that's the characters in Mortal Kombat are pretty, for the most part, can be pretty complex. So that's what makes those guys interesting. And Ghost of Tsushima, that overall, that's just a great game, story wise, gameplay wise. I couldn't have asked for a better game than that.
You said that you've been watching like foreign movies or movies outside Hollywood. What are some examples of those movies you've seen?
Um, Actually, a lot of them kind of tend to go back a little bit. I try to seek out like action and action and sci-fi movies that I've seen. For instance, I own a movie called Returner that stars Takeshi Kaneshiro. It's a pretty good sci-fi action movie. It's about a guy who runs into a kid who travels through time to stop an alien invasion. Um, Psychokinesis was actually another good one. Also, I found that on Netflix. It's about a father who drinks water that has a chemical in it that gives him psychokinetic powers. He tries to save some gangsters.
Save his daughter from gangsters.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mentioned the horror movie Veronica.
Veronica. Foreign movies and outside outside Hollywood. Have you seen Mera, Rajamon, Seven Samurai, Stalker, Andrew Rublev? Have you seen any of those movies?
Seven Samurai, I've seen a number of times. It's one of my favorites.
And then the other ones I haven't had a chance to check out.
Okay. Yeah, I do recommend those movies. Like
Oh,
Andrei Tarkovsky, who made Mera, Stalker, and Andrew Rublev, is like one of the best movies ever.
yeah, I will definitely check those out then for sure. I'll add those to the list.
Yeah, and Rajamon is The same director who made Seven Samurai.
Akira Kurosawa. Yep.
Yeah. Have you seen classics, like super classic movies?
I definitely have. I mean, given certain things that I read in school. I mean, I've seen Casablanca. I've seen a number of old black and white movies. The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock's early works. I've seen those. The Birds, Vertigo, um, 1970s movies. I mean, good amount of black exploitation movies like Shaft, Black Caesar, Hell Up in Harlem. I've seen those as well.
What is something that you inspire to be?
I guess it would be an all-around, very competent content creator. That's not just with like YouTube videos or podcasting. That's with like writing a good story, making a movie, even if it's a film. Just something that people can overall enjoy. Like we talked about earlier, there's too many critics out there that are calling themselves critics, but they're not really critics. They're just clickbaiters, essentially. They just go on rants and just tear things down, but don't offer any actual constructive criticism. But unfortunately, those things are what get numbers on screen as far as viewing is concerned. So that's the formula people that these days stick to, and unfortunately, is working. But like I said, I don't want to fall into that pipeline, which is why, like I mentioned before, when I review things, I try to be unbiased as possible. I mean, granted, anything I watch, I would like to enjoy to some degree or another. But if I don't, it is what it is. But I'm not gonna flip my wig or lose my head over something as simple as a race swap or a gender bend or a reimagining or reinterpretation of an original story.
Unless it affects the story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is the worst movie you have seen, and what's the worst video game you ever played?
The worst movie I've ever seen. I can only measure that metric to movies that I've possibly fallen asleep watching. There's only been two of them. I fell asleep watching Urban Legends 2. I don't even know I want to go see that movie. And I fell asleep watching Ocean's 12. That movie put me right to sleep. I know there's some other movies that I've seen that weren't all that great. I can't really think of them at the moment right now. But yeah, those are the two that I can think of right off the top of my head. On the worst video game, I remember I was on a big Jet Li kick back in the early 2000s when he was really starting to come out. So I had his game Rise to Honor for PlayStation 2. It was cool, but it was needlessly hard, and the controls were like very, very wonky after a while. So that's the game I ended up just giving away. I gave it to a friend of mine because I just couldn't play it anymore. Um, Thinking about other games that I've played that I just didn't really like, or probably like Return to the Store. There was one Dragon Ball Z game that I did play that I just didn't like. Luckily, I didn't own it. It was Dragon Ball Z Sagas that came out after the Budokai Tenkaichi series had wrapped up. But yeah, that's definitely one game that I did not enjoy playing.
What is one advice you would give to someone who's pursuing YouTube or acting or writing or directing?
Be original and be authentic. Um, you and I both know that YouTube's been overrun. Not even just YouTube, but a lot of the content makers, content creators have been overrun and also overwhelmed with trying to create the next, as far as filmmaking is concerned, create the next franchise, which you don't really have to do. Sometimes just a one-off is okay. It's okay to just make one good movie and then go on to make another one good movie. Everything doesn't always have to be connected. I know it's a good money maker these days, but then that's not always necessary because after a certain point, it's going to stifle your creativity. I mean, like I mentioned before, you can be a part of a franchise and work on a fraction or a portion of, a project, but to wholly create something that's all your own is something completely different. That's a completely different feeling. Um, as far as writing, write, just just write. Don't worry about if it stinks. Don't worry if it doesn't really look good on paper. Just write. All that stuff can be fixed later on. I mean, I look back at my scripts very often and try to make sure I didn't miss any misspelled words or screwing any lines up or missed a whole line of dialogue or just making sure that something just sounds good on paper and just makes sense when it's spoken out in audio. So, but the whole point at the end of the day, and with everything, is to really just go ahead and do it. Like writing is relatively easy. You know, jump in front of your computer. Whatever idea you had sitting in your head, just get it down before you forget it. Put it out there. Develop a story around it. You know, atmosphere, characters, things like that. Just do that. Like one of the things that helps me with writing is outlining things first. Like listing things out, and then I can put a story behind it. Like I said, as far as like being a content creator, whether you're a YouTuber or a podcaster, be consistent. Even if that means you're going to make content every day or once a week or once a month. Just make sure you're consistent with that because over time you'll put it off, you'll put it off, and then eventually you'll just forget that you got to do those things, and then you got to kind of regroup and set yourself back up again. That's something I'm kind of fighting right now from being very inconsistent with my content making. But essentially, it's about being original, being authentic, and being consistent with what you're doing.
What do you think the future of Hollywood will be? Would it be better or would it be worse?
Honestly speaking, it's kind of all relative. Um, I do feel like it'll probably get worse before it gets better. I mean, I know most people are looking at it, probably saying it's not that bad right now. In hindsight 2020, it's really not all that bad. But certain business practices and ideologies will start changing real soon. If you look at what's
Oh,
happening,
it broke up. What do you say again?
I think in retrospect, they will get worse before they get better. I mean, let's look at what's happening with the streaming platforms right now. Now we're reaching a point where these streaming platforms are starting to team up. They're starting to combine to create an even bigger, I guess, stronger streaming platform. And the consensus from a lot of people is that it's essentially turning right back into cable. You know, we spent all these years trying to get from underneath the thumb of cable service providers because we're paying all this money for a whole bunch of channels that we don't even need and don't even want. All these streaming platforms started to come out, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Peacock, Paramount Plus, things like that. Though they were supposed to help mitigate the pressures of having to pay a whole bunch of money for a whole bunch of channels that you don't want. And now a lot of these streaming services, I believe, what is it? Max, Disney, and Hulu are looking to consolidate together to become a new streaming service altogether, and that means their rivals are going to be doing the same exact thing too. I mean, how much is this going to cost people? I mean, if it's going to be at a low price, then okay, cool. But that doesn't change the fact that essentially they're turning these things right back into cable. So it makes me wonder how long is this going to last? Because right now, there's no new way of consuming media on our horizon at this point. I mean, think about it. We went from the regular movies to Betamax to the VHS to the DVD to the Blu-ray. It'll probably get worse before it gets better, considering, like I said, all these streaming platforms are combining, are consolidating into small to like less medium-sized groups. Like I said, Max, I believe Max, Disney Plus, and Hulu are all looking to consolidate to form one big streaming platform, which would mean like its competitors like Peacock, Paramount Plus, and I don't know who else. They're going to be combining to form one super streaming service. And you got to ask yourself, where's going to be the through line? Like, where is it? Where's the insanity going to end? Because again, we spent years complaining about cable service for the streaming service to kind of go fall right into that same pipeline of becoming, you know, cable. Um, as I mentioned, if the pricing isn't going to, it's going to remain the same. If it's not going to be as much as cable is, then cool. I'm all for it. But at what cost is it going to be where we have to continually, you know, conglomerate and join together to, you know, save time and money essentially. And considering the fact that a lot of these streaming platforms have really delved into their original content, they have to find a way to offset that because let's look at Netflix. Netflix is, creating I mean, they've always created original content, with Stranger Things and things like that. But now they're delving deeper into the movie aspect, and now you got to ask yourself, the price that we're charging people for subscriptions is it going to be enough to pay these people who are making these original movies for Netflix? Which is where you see the price increases on subscription services or different tiers. You can pay for streaming with ads or streaming without ads for an extra cost. And then it's like, this is not what you were doing in the beginning. And I understand the industry changes and it evolves over time, but does it have to evolve at the cost of the customer? Because, I mean, a lot of people I know have either renounced cable or they're getting ready to renounce cable. And the slippery slope to falling back into that cable pipeline is a very steep slope. So then we got to start asking ourselves what's going to be the end game here. So yeah, I do feel like it's going to get worse before it gets better. What the better thing is, that I can't. No, I don't know what the better option is going to be later down the line, but we'll have to wait and see. I know Meta is playing a big part in trying to jump into the streaming service game, but I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make later on down the line.
Thank you for joining. This is the Mastermind, and thanks for listening to Dredloc Blerd Entertainment. Do you have
Thank you for
anything?
having me on the show. Mhm.
You're welcome. Do you have anything to promote?
Um, I got a lot more podcast episodes coming down the line. Um, I mean, I kind of, well, actually, no, I didn't use AI to help me schedule my schedule my things out, but I finally give myself a little bit more free time to finally sit down and create a schedule for myself. So be on the lookout for a couple of videos coming down the line. One is actually going to be pertaining to AI and its impact on certain aspects of creativity. So that should be for an interesting show. And there's a couple of things. There's a couple of reviews I got to get out. Like I said, I got to get on my full review for um Madam Web, as well as there was another movie that I recently watched recently that come out a while ago that I didn't watch in the movie theater. So be on the lookout for that too.
So the AI thing is you're going to talk about it on your channel.
Yeah.
Uh,
And later on down the line, I plan to actually do this before the release of Deadpool versus Wolverine, and I'm gonna finally talk about this idea of superhero fatigue. Spoiler alert: it is not a real thing. Superhero fatigue is not a thing. Well, a lot of us are experiencing our repetition fatigue, and I will get into that later on in that show. So be on the lookout for that.
Please make sure you subscribe to Dredloc Blerd Entertainment, and thank you for watching.